I know you've all been dying to get to these awesome multiple choice questions on fraud risk, so let's dive in. Which of the following groups within an entity is typically in the best position to perpetrate material fraud? Now, technically, can anyone commit fraud? Sure. I mean, a customer could, steal something from the cash register. Entry level personnel could probably do the same. They could steal merchandise. Directors, management, everyone can perpetrate fraud. Now, a couple items I want to use to eliminate. So it says within an entity. Now, customers are not really in an entity, right? I love companies that say, "Oh, well, our customers are our family, right? Our employees are our family." But that's not the case, right? Customers are not within an entity, so I would cross off customers. And then it also says material fraud. Now, entry level personnel, I would generally cross them off. I mean, sure, entry level personnel could probably steal significant chunk of change for our purposes, but material for a company, it's not really going to be, maybe they steal $1,000, right? But for Best Buy or for Apple, that's not really material. So I would cross up entry level personnel. Now that leaves us with just management and directors. You probably just remember this from the lesson, but it is going to be management, right? So management is in charge. Directors are not particularly so. Like a director doesn't necessarily mean they have the same roles and benefits and access as management, right? So I mean, similar there, but management and also think about it. How many times have we mentioned directors in this exam versus management? I mean, management comes up every other slide, right? Seemingly, so management is definitely going to be the answer there. Directors, more of a vague answer, as well as again, we don't really talk about directors, but management are those specifically identified within the AICPA as those in control, right? Those who have the ability to perpetrate material fraud, right? They can override controls. They're in the best position because they can override those controls, manipulate accounting records, and prepare fraudulent financial statements. Very good. Moving on. Next up, we have James Jones is the bookkeeper of Prestige Yachts. So it's a yacht builder for high net worth individuals. And it's got to be rough, right? It says James is struggling to pay medical bills for a sick child and needs short term cash. So, I mean, I'm already sympathizing with this guy, right? He's dealing with high net worth individuals, building yachts, which are objectively not essential for life, whereas medical bills for a sick child is quite necessary. However, I have to take the stance of this isn't a Disney movie. We have to take the objective stance of what is right in the business world. So he decides to cash checks for outstanding accounts and replace them as soon as he gets the money. So this is essentially him borrowing money. I mean, so like you could say, "Oh, I'm just borrowing the money from the company. I'll give it right back." But I mean, if you haven't seen that already with me or somewhere else, you will see that in examples in Sims and multiple choice. That is not okay. Even if you give the money back, you do not have the authority to borrow this. So there's no doubt whether or not this is fraud, but what type of fraud is it, right? What is the, in the fraud triangle, what is this an example of, right? So it knows that customers have a lot of money and really won't be affected by his scheme anyway. Again, right? Even if that's the case, even if any of you've seen Office Space, right, where they talk about their little scheme to just take fractions of pennies. Technically, not even technically, just that's just illegal. That's fraud. So that is not allowed. That is illegal. This is a problem. Now, first, I'm going to say, let's identify. Are any of these? So this question is directly asking us from the fraud triangle, but the question may not even mention the fraud triangle. It might say, okay, what motivation, right, or what rationalization. I mean, I know rationalization is one of them, but what's the drive of this individual to commit fraud? So if we look at the fraud triangle, well, we've got incentive, opportunity, and rationalization. Well, I just spotted that right there. I'll pay it back. It's for a good purpose, right? It's for a sick child. Now, again, I'm not the ethics mastermind. I am not the one saying what the right thing to do in this situation is. I guess my best answer for you, wonderful people listening in, would be to just say to your company, "Hey, I have a sick child. Can I just borrow some money?" Again, I'm not really not here to do that. So as much as I would love to. So a lot of questions will just have the three of them, right? And you have to pick. and then they'd have another fake one. But it looks like we've got 3 false ones here. These are not on our fraud triangle. They're social justice, fair application, determination. These are not instances on the fraud triangle. That leaves us with just rationalization. And from what we remember in the lesson, this is exactly rationalization, right? It's for a good purpose. No one's going to be affected by it. It's just short term. I'm not taking anything in the aggregate, right? It's just taking short term money, right? So it's like he doesn't have to get a high interest loan to pay for medical bills. So that's what we're dealing with here. Awesome, awesome. When planning an audit, the CPA auditor should document in the work papers the risk assessment of material misstatement of the financial statements due to fraud. Of the following, which should be included in the work paper documentation if factors are identified and present? Now, here, just to make a point and to highlight it, right? We didn't say that there was fraud. We said there is risk of material misstatement of financial statements due to fraud. So it's just a risk of it due to fraud. It's not saying there is something happening. So, right, it doesn't say there is fraud that occurred, but it is important, right? If a CPA auditor is doing an audit, right, and all of a sudden they see, okay, well, there is a complete lack of internal controls, over cash. So yeah, I mean, if there's zero internal controls over cash, right, it's just kept in an unlocked room, and anyone has access to it. Yeah, it's an issue. So that would be something that this auditor would have to document. So included in the work paper documentation if the factors are identified and present. So a discussion of the risk factor with the client. So a lot of these may be required to do, but it's not necessarily required to be documented, right? So now the CPA, yeah, they should definitely talk about that risk factor with the client. They should say, hey, you shouldn't keep your cash in an unlocked room that everyone has access to. But does the auditor need to actually document that? No, the auditor does not. Put a copy of the report of the risk factor to the company legal counsel. So this could be something they do additionally, but it's not required at all to even talk about this. You don't need to go to the company's legal counsel, right, and tell them about it. You just need to go to management, those charged with governance. So it's not something you have to do. Sure, would it be nice? It's an extra little step, making the client happy, making them aware of, making their legal counsel aware. I mean, I also don't really see why the legal counsel would need to know, but maybe there's a reason. And then investigation of the risk factors. So again, you should investigate those risk factors. However, documentation when it comes to fraud risk is much more specific and simply says those risk factors identified need to be documented. So that is going to occur here. If any risk factors are identified at any point during an audit, those risk factors should be documented in the working papers. Now, yes, you're going to investigate them, you're going to communicate them, but this question, and like many questions, they will, a lot of these will be seemingly 3 right answers, but you got to think about it. What stage are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the planning stage, which in this case doesn't really matter, right? Because it's in any stage during the audit, you need to identify these factors and document them. But so, okay, if that's not something that's going on, think about it. We're specifically talking about documentation. If this question asked which should be communicated to management, well, that's a whole different story. So think about what stage of the audit we're in as we're going through multiple choice questions, and think about, I'll call it what lesson, right? So this lesson is fraud risk, and more specifically documentation, and that's why all these lessons are pretty interconnected. So think back to what we saw in this lesson, and then think back to the documentation lesson, right? So yes, some of these will be communicated, but this is specifically asking about what needs to be put down on paper and saved in the audit file. Last up here, when the status of a firm's internal control is strong, the level of substantive procedures should be what? All right, well, this is harking back to audit risk, as you should be familiar with, and it never hurts to, again, interconnect these, have some extra multiple choice questions in here, right? So they're connected. Fraud risk is pretty well connected with audit risk. And in this question, so if the internal controls are strong, we have our audit risk formula. Definitely keep this in mind. So we want this overall amount to be as low as possible. If internal controls are strong, meaning this risk is a lot lower, detection risk is a lot lower as well, or detection risk could actually be higher, in which case, because internal controls are stronger, we can rely on them, and detection risk, we don't have to worry about that as much because we can count on we can essentially permit more risk to happen around these internal controls to catch it. So in this case, I'm going to say, and there's no medium. That's not really. I mean, medium, maximum. I would say, generally speaking, we're probably going to choose like minimal or high, or like minimal or maximum. Um, and that just comes with practice, seeing these multiple choice questions over and over, as well as what we talk about in the lessons. So, generally speaking, also, which of these is not like the other? We have two high, right? High and maximum pretty much mean the same thing. So that leaves just minimal, right? Because, again, to reiterate this, if our internal controls are strong, that means control risk is low, which means the overall audit risk number, which again we talked about much more in depth in the audit risk lesson. So if you want to recap that, definitely go check out that lesson. Um, we are going to not need as many substantive procedures because detection risk can be higher.
And that would be as good a time as ever to run through an example for you. I am going to say, in this case, we have our audit risk, and I'm going to assign that number to 16. Our overall audit risk, the risk that we are going to give the incorrect opinion, is 16. And what is that made up of? That's made up of inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. With that, what are the numbers I'm going to assign here? Well, let's say we assess inherent risk at 2. We originally assessed control risk at 4. And then we assess detection risk at 2. In this case, we are going to do some additional testing of internal controls, right? We have our preliminary assessment. Now we're doing additional testing, and we determine that internal controls are stronger than we originally anticipated. As such, let's say we drop this to 2. We drop control risk to 2. And then we see our overall audit risk now drops to 8. 2 times 2 times 2 being 8. And when we have this concept of audit risk, we actually don't mind it staying consistent, because that's just balancing out the amount of work. In this case, because we can depend upon internal controls more, we are going to say maybe we do less testing, which is going to increase the risk that we miss something because we're doing less testing. Again, why do we do that? Well, that's going to allow us to save on budget, save on time, take less responsibility for work. In this case, we are back up to 16. 2 times 2 gives us 4, times 4 gives us 16. Again, this is a nice little formula. We have our graphics, we have our mathematical ways of doing them, of conceptualizing it. Hope you enjoyed this, as I know you're enjoying everything we're going through here. Have a great rest of your day. Keep studying strong, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.